Welcome back to Crimes of Infamy. All right, Sabrina, let's kick this episode off the same way we've been doing it previously with a quick game of two truths and a lie about today's subject, Danny rolling the Gainesville Ripper.
All right, give them to me.
All right, number one, Danny studied anatomy to commit his murders more efficiently. Number two, he went to jail when he was only 13 and was put there by his father. And number three, he dreamed of being a famous country singer.
Why do I love the idea that he really wanted to be a famous country singer?
It feels like the lie, doesn't it? It feels like
the lie. I think I have to go with that one.
Yeah, but that one is actually true. He did want to be a famous country singer.
Does he have... No, I don't want to entertain it.
A country career?
Yeah, what's his, does he have an album?
Oh my
I don't care. I'm not giving him any time.
And in this case, the lie is actually number one because it turns out Danny was not so sophisticated in being a criminal. He killed in the heat of passion. He stabbed his victims to death in a psychotic frenzy. So he certainly was not studying anatomy to get away with his crimes.
So today we will tell you all about Danny rolling, the victims he left in his wake as he became known as the Gainesville Ripper, and how his actions inspired the terrifying ghost face killer in the legendary movie franchise Scream, whose films have collectively grossed about $1 billion in the box office. Wow. Billion.
I believe it. Who hasn't seen Scream or at least heard of Scream?
Right.
It's the classic movie. Everyone recognizes the mask.
Everyone.
Welcome to Crimes of Infamy, a Crime House original powered by Pave Studios. We are your hosts, Corinne Vien and Sabrina Deana-Roga, and I will be the one walking you through the chilling narratives of every story.
And I will be zooming in on the moments and showing you how the very real scenes in these stories played out. Every Tuesday, we're exploring a different corner of the true crime universe, examining cases that left a permanent impact on society. And this season is all about the crimes behind the world's most iconic horror movies. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to join our community so you never miss an episode.
Today, we are talking about Danny rolling, the vicious serial killer who inspired the Scream franchise. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
A warning before we begin. This episode contains descriptions of murder, sexual assault, physical abuse of animals, and death of a minor. Please listen with care. In August of 1990, 36-year-old Danny Rolling terrorized college students in Gainesville, Florida, killing 5 people in just 4 days. Before that, he murdered 3 people in Shreveport, Louisiana. But before we talk about anything else, we do want to take a minute to say his victims' names. In Gainesville, Tracy Paula, Sonia Larson, Manny Tabota, Christa Hoyt, and Christina Powell. And in Shreveport, Tom Grissom, Julie Grissom, and Sean Grissom.
These people all had bright, promising futures ahead of them, and their lives were cut short for no reason in senseless acts of violence. And it's always important to us and for us to acknowledge the indescribable loss their loved ones suffered, all because of the crimes committed by Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper.
The brutality of Danny's crimes and his twisted theatrics shocked the nation, and they also caught the attention of an emerging screenwriter named Kevin Williamson. The Gainesville Ripper murder inspired him to write a horror film, and it became the launchpad for one of the world's biggest horror franchises.
So I didn't really know much about Danny Rolling before this episode, and I wish I could say it stayed that way.
I know,
but here we are about to tell you all about him.
And for having seen almost all of the Scream movies in the franchise and all of the new ones too, I had no clue it was based on an actual person.
Me neither. But I do love the Scream movies.
Yeah. Well, today we're taking the mask off and we're going to learn about the killer behind Ghostface.
We're going to rip off the mask. But also then we'll talk a lot about the movie Scream and Kevin Williamson. And I have insider knowledge, bragging. It's like I worked with the wife of the director of the new Scream movies. So I have like a little bit of inside knowledge.
Oh, do you?
And then I interviewed.
You have gossip?
I mean, it's actually very wholesome gossip. And then I interviewed to work on one of Kevin Williamson's show, and I didn't get the job.
So a little bit of gossip, a little bit of drama to start out with.
Exactly. And then there also are a lot of Kevin Williamson projects that we can recommend to you to watch if you need a breather and a refresher, something to take your mind off of the horrifying, because he worked on some great things like Dawson's Creek, Vampire Diaries.
Vampire Diaries, yes.
Yes, so many things.
Yeah, but I am curious. We are curious to know how many people realize that Scream was based on a real person. So we're going to create a poll in Spotify. Vote and let us know. And if you have any more fun facts about these movies, drop your comments on YouTube because we would love to know.
Mm-hmm.
But in case you haven't seen any of the Scream movies, here's the gist. There is a serial killer known as Ghostface who haunts and arguably hunts in a fictional town of Woodsboro, California.
Like Danny Rolling, he targets young girls,
taunts his victims,
and throws the small community into chaos.
The crimes that inspired the movies were so brutal that screenwriter Kevin Williamson had to actually tone down the gore in his scripts to make his script more marketable, which is hard to believe if you've seen the Scream movies. But this over-the-top violence was really Danny Rolling's whole point.
Yes, he wanted everyone to know about it. It is just after midnight on Monday, August 27th, 1990. Despite the late hour, Tracy Paulus is wide awake. The 23-year-old should be excited about starting her senior year at University of Florida tomorrow, but instead, she is terrified. 2 young women have just been brutally murdered in the area, Sonia Larson and her roommate, Christina Powell. Like Tracy, they were students at the university, and also like Tracy, they were white, brunette, and conventionally attractive. So it's deeply unsettling. Tracy cannot stop thinking about it. She knows she shouldn't worry. After all, her roommate, Manny Tabota, is a giant guy. Nobody's going to mess with him, right? But Manny's not around tonight, and Tracy is feeling very alone. She knows that she's not going to fall asleep anytime soon, so she calls her sister Lori. All Tracy can think about is the murders. Her fear is all-consuming, so Lori gets her to change the subject. She asks Tracy to tell her about the weekend getaway she just had with her new boyfriend, Chris. Finally, Tracy smiles. She has some big news for Lori. She and Chris said they loved each other for the first time. And not only that, but they slept together too. This conversation helps Tracy get her mind off of the murders. Plus, Manny will be home soon. She'll get to get some sleep and everything will be okay. She'll finish school, become a lawyer, and maybe spend the rest of her life with Chris. She has no idea that outside her window, she is being watched. And tragically, the future she sees for herself will never come to pass. And if you have seen the Scream films, you'll recognize that scene that we just painted for you is very, very reminiscent of the opening scene of Scream.
The original.
Where Drew Barrymore is on the phone and getting a call.
Chatting away. Later that night, after Manny got home, someone did break into their apartment and he murdered Manny first, and then he killed Tracy. After Tracy's boyfriend, Chris, didn't hear from her the next day, he asked one of Manny's friends to go check on them, and that friend found the bodies of Tracy and Manny. The police were certain that they had been killed by the same person who previously had murdered Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. And since then, another victim had also been discovered, Christa Hoyt, making Manny and Tracy the 4th and 5th victims killed in a span of only 3 days. 3 days.
5 victims in 3 days.
I can't even imagine how someone isn't caught like in the act of doing this. This just seems so implausible too, that like someone could be slinking around. Like, when are they sleeping? It seems like
it's horrifying.
They're not. It's really, really terrifying. And it does feel almost supernatural, which makes sense in terms of like the horror film of Ghostface, which is like, how is this possible? Is there just one killer?
Mm-hmm.
How can someone get away and stalk this many people at once?
And also killing sprees like this are, a lot of serial killers will strike once and then have like a prolonged period of time off before striking again. So this is like really horrifying. And you can imagine how the entire town and community of Gainesville, this like college town, is horrified.
Oh, absolutely. In the aftermath, Newsweek compared the murders to Jack the Ripper, which led to the nickname being given to this murderer, which was the Gainesville Ripper. So inspired by Jack the Ripper, but Gainesville, the area where it was happening. Police did not know who he was yet, but we do. His name was Danny Rolling. Danny stalked young women and subjected them to brutal sexual violence, and his sadism was fueled by years of abuse at his father's hands. And because of how most of his victims look, many believe that he was targeting women who looked a lot like his mother, who Danny felt and blamed for not saving him from his father's violence. Well, Danny also said that at least one of them reminded him of his ex-wife.
And I think she even looked a lot like his ex-wife.
Yeah, I do know that when he was first rejected by his ex-wife, that first rape victim happened after that rejection. And he said basically that that was the reason for his attack.
God.
And before he unleashed hell on the city of Gainesville, he lived through hell himself. Hailing from Shreveport, Louisiana, Danny came of age in the late 1960s. And while many parts of the country were embracing the hippie attitudes and free love, his household was defined by the exact opposite. Of course, nothing can excuse Danny for what he went on to do. But to get the full context of this story, it's important to know his entire story first. And a big part of that was the abuse he endured at his father's hands, James Rolling. A U.S. Navy vet and a police officer, James beat his son from the time that he was 6 months old.
So
and
sad.
Danny grew up just constantly being hit by his father for doing anything. Everything he did was wrong, for taking up space in the same room, for even breathing too loudly. There was one report I read where he was beaten when he was just 1 year old for not crawling correctly. These are just some examples. If you actually read the nitty gritty of what Danny endured, it is like, if you've ever read the book Child Called It, it is so similar. It made me want to vomit and cry. It's sickening.
Yeah. And I'm sure as a mother yourself, like that's like you couldn't even imagine.
I could barely read it. Danny's mom, Claudia, she really tried to protect him and his little brother, Kevin. But as is tragically too common in situations like this and abuse cases, she also feared what would happen if she ever left her husband.
And she did try like multiple times to leave and then would end up going back to him, which is also very common in abuse situations. Like your abuser also becomes like your whole world. They isolate you. They take away all of your resources and like love bomb you in a way that you're reliant on them.
Yeah. And things just kept getting worse for the kids too over time. And James would tie his sons up for hours at a time. He made them eat dinner while wearing blindfolds. He reportedly trapped neighborhood cats in the backyard and then forced the boys to watch as he killed them. And I also read when Danny was just 5 years old, he had a puppy who he loved so much. And his father beat the puppy so horribly. And then Danny held the puppy and watched the puppy die in his arms. So this is
that's horrible.
One of the worst cases of child abuse.
I mean, it's very clear, like he didn't want to be a dad. He wanted to be a torturer. Like he's torturing.
Oh, he didn't want kids. He was really upset, actually. I feel like that's another important detail that we didn't mention was that James Rolling did not want children. And yet he had two.
And then tortured them.
Mm-hmm. So you would think that Danny would grow up with this burning hatred of his dad and maybe his mom a little bit too, but his feelings were a lot more complicated than that. Yep. He hated his father, yet he yearned for his father's approval. And while he tried to forgive his mother, he was also overwhelmed with resentment for her. He really was expecting her to save them, and that didn't happen. And so he had really complicated feelings towards both of his parents. He fantasized about his mom leaving James and saving him and his brother. And like you said, she did try a few times, but never truly succeeded. And by the age of 13, Danny was suffering. He was stealing. He was drinking heavily, trying to cope with all the trauma of his entire life.
I read that he started drinking at like 11. So by the time he's 13, he's like fully drinking to cope.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one night, his father caught him with a bottle of whiskey, and the incident led to another beating. But that wasn't all. James had his fellow officers because James, the child abuser, was a police officer. He had his fellow officers throw Danny in jail for 2 weeks as punishment.
2 whole weeks.
Mm-hmm. His child.
Which, like, you can't even imagine. Like, what happened in those 2 weeks while he's in prison?
Honestly, like, I would like to think that it probably was a break from his household.
But it probably wasn't, especially if, like, these fellow cops are in on it and they're like, yeah, let's teach him a lesson. I can't imagine they're treating him well for 2 weeks.
No, and I guess, like, to your point, when he returned from those 2 weeks, he was never the same. And he never told anyone what happened during those 2 weeks when he was in jail.
It's the middle of the night. 13-year-old Danny has just been released from jail, but he has no interest in going back home. He shoves his bedroom window open, tosses a backpack outside. It's stuffed with dry food, a flashlight, and a ratty old blanket. Everything a runaway needs. He takes one last look at his room, then climbs out the window and drops into the bushes. He is sick and tired of dealing with his parents, tired of dealing with school, tired of everything, and he plans to leave and never look back. Danny shoulders his pack and marches aimlessly through his neighborhood without a clear destination in mind. A few hours later, he finds himself deep in the Louisiana woods. And where he expected peace and quiet, he is surprised to hear a wall of noise surrounding him. He's paralyzed by fear as the wind screeches through pine trees, the sounds of buzzing insects, snapping twigs, and screeching animals, all keeping him awake all night. Even so, it's better than being home. He stays in the forest until the next day, because anything is better than being home. When darkness falls that second night, sexual fantasies distract him from his fear. Danny imagines himself growing larger, stronger, like his dad. He wants to be big enough to overpower others, because that is what it means to him to be a man. Control. And in that moment, he touches himself as he thinks about hurting people, especially women. Though he won't admit it to himself, the women in his fantasies resemble his mother. Pale with dark brown hair and matching eyes. He dreams of having power over both their life and their death. He fantasizes about bloody murder.
We all know how sick this is. And if you're wondering, is this true? How could this be true? We know it's true because Danny himself actually wrote a book about his life and his crimes. And he admitted to having rape fantasies as a teenager and that he would go into the woods and essentially masturbate while thinking about murdering people. He didn't mention this specific incident in his own book, but it is cataloged in a different book, The Gainesville Ripper by Mary Rizik.
Her work was exhaustively researched, drawing on interviews, court transcripts, thousands of investigative reports, and countless articles. So it does feel safe to say that the information is reliable, albeit very, very disturbing.
Very disturbing.
Especially because Danny himself said he was unhappy with how he was like portrayed in that book, which to me makes me think, yeah, because you didn't get to control the narrative.
Right.
You didn't like
how things were talked
looking
about.
in the mirror.
Totally.
Yeah.
And also, I can't imagine what it's like to actually write a book about someone like him and about these crimes, because like it's so much effort to write a book and to have to do all of this research and just kind of constantly be bombarded by some of the darkest corners and darkest thoughts of humanity.
As we sit here doing exactly that.
Well, not to the extent that Mary did.
That's true.
Yeah. I feel for Mary.
I do. Me too.
Okay, well, regardless of what happened in these woods, whether Mary's depiction of it is correct or Danny's, he did not last long there because the next day reality set in. Danny was happy to be away from his parents, but it was clear that he could not survive on his own out there. And I mean, he couldn't survive as in he couldn't survive one day out there alone because he was already out of food.
But keep in mind, he's also a kid. Like,
right.
He's young. He just spent 2 weeks in jail because his dad put him there. Like,
I know.
He's thinking, I need to get out of here quick. But unfortunately, yeah, he's a child. He doesn't know to pack up all of his cans.
Exactly.
Like,
I remember when I was little, I wanted to run away because it's one of those things, like all the kids run away. And so I wanted to have the runaway experience. So my mom like helped me pack a bag.
She helped you pack your bag.
Yeah. Well, she supervised, but I still remember what I selected. I had a few granola bars and then I packed some panty liners because I was like, one day I'll get my period out here.
Why are you so cute?
But I also wouldn't have survived more than a few hours with those items, and I didn't. I had to go home.
I love that your mom helped you pack your runaway bag.
She stood on the sidewalk and watched me in the field
bye.
pretend to live on my own with my panty liners and granola bars.
I love that.
Yeah, but my situation was obviously very different. Like, he truly was trying to escape and unfortunately realized that he couldn't live without going back. So he was not outside of his home for very long. He did return to his home, and for the next 4 years, he just grit his teeth and he endured the life that he had there, that he'd sort of gotten used to, but was constantly trying to escape.
Yeah.
And sometimes he went out at night and he would spy on girls through their windows, and that's sort of how he passed time and felt a little thrill and felt alive for a moment.
And his sexual fantasies kind of continued to develop.
Right. So he dreamt of leaving town, of getting far away from his parents and making his dark fantasies come true. And at 17 years old, he came up with a way out. He would join the Air Force. And so Danny pleaded with his dad to let him enlist because he was underage, so he needed parental permission to enlist in the Air Force. And finally, relenting, James's last words to his son before boot camp were, quote, "See to it you don't screw up."
And also going back to Danny wanting his father's approval, like his dad was in the military. He served the country. And so it's like, oh, look, I'm getting 2 things out of this, or hoping to get 2 things out of this. One, to leave this toxic, unhealthy home, but then hopefully get approval of his father.
Danny did screw up. Just 2 years after enlisting in 1973, Danny was discharged for repeatedly defying orders and using drugs.
And I think he did participate in some other unholy crimes. Yes. But he was dishonorably discharged.
Mm-hmm. He was diagnosed with an unspecified personality disorder and returned home. And once he returned home, he moved back in with his parents, and he tried and tried and tried and failed and failed and failed at holding down a job.
Yep.
So his drinking is now getting way worse, and he realizes he's kind of at a crossroads in his life. Because if he doesn't clean up his act soon, he's going to end up in jail and prove his father right, that he's basically a failure and he's going to screw up. And he very sincerely did want to turn his life around. And he just didn't really know where to start. And so that's kind of where the drinking came in, and he continued to drink. And one day he was getting drunk in a neighborhood park when a group of churchgoers noticed. They were on their way to a service, and they stopped to comfort him. They encouraged him to put down the bottle and to find the Lord. And to Danny, his response to experiencing this was he felt like they were angels sent down from heaven to save him, essentially, like a literal sign from God. This was his chance to be saved. And for the first time in his life, he took a helping hand.
I mean, it's very obvious from a lot of his behaviors, especially in this time of his life. All he wants is to be loved and belong and feel like he belongs. His peeping turns into a much more serious, violent crime. It does make me think that he's like looking in these windows at people who are living lives that he wished he had.
Maybe, but it's all women.
Right.
It's not just like I'm peeping at 6 p.m. into this family home and watching everyone have dinner and talk together.
Yeah.
It is, peeping is one of those signs. It's just like when people start harming animals. It's like one of those telltale signs of something.
It's going to progress into something
that could easily escalate. And peeping is definitely one of those. It reminds me of like Golden State Killer and some of those other murderers out there that like that is sort of the beginning and the progression.
We had peeping Toms. So Corinne and I met in college, and like your junior, senior year, you live off campus, and there were multiple predators, because that's what they are. I'm going to call them that would be caught on cameras peeping in windows. Like there was one who got so bad that they learned the schedule of the girls living in the house.
Yes.
And one day broke into the home, didn't realize that one of the girls had skipped her class. And so she's in her room, like by herself,
face to face now
with this man. And the police couldn't do anything because technically no crime had been committed.
Except he
broke in.
Yeah. It was tough.
It's so scary.
Living in LA. But for Danny, these churchgoers are the helping hand. This is like his opportunity to have someone else who's coming at him with warmth and acceptance and giving him an opportunity to basically save him, to give him a family or just like some sort of purpose, right?
Exactly.
To be loved for a moment.
Yeah.
But going to church could only keep Danny's demons at bay for so long. His anger, his desire to blame someone for his pain, it soon overwhelmed him, and no matter what he did, how many services he attended, Danny had a darkness inside him that was about to burst. So here Danny is. It's 1973. He's really starting to turn his life around. The 19-year-old found a community at the King's Temple United Pentecostal Church in his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, which was actually only like a block or two away from his home. So it was really nice because it was so close. So I do imagine, like in my mind, I picture him in really dark moments, like running from his house to this church for respite.
Yep.
And the people there were very kind to him, and they did actively work with him to help him sort of clean up his act. He even found a girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And at the church social event, he met this girlfriend, O'Mather Halco. And the following year, when Danny was just 20 years old and O'Mather was 19, they got married and he moved out of his parents' house. Finally, thank God. He was probably literally thanking God.
Yeah.
And things started off well. But Danny had never seen a healthy relationship. And so instead of letting O'Mather help him and shape kind of what a healthy relationship could be for them, he instead lashed out, and Danny started to drink again. He became secretive. He would wander the streets at all hours. O'Mather was always wondering, like, where is he going? Where are you going? What are you doing? And then one night in the summer of 1975, her questions are answered. Because that evening, while Danny was out, 2 police officers showed up at their door, and her husband, Danny, is standing between them. They found him peeping in a woman's window. And O'Mather wanted to end things with Danny right then and there, but she was pregnant. So that really complicated things. And then she decided she would give him another chance for the sake of her child and the family.
Right.
And try to understand what's going on and try to help him, right? Like they met in church.
Let's take this to the church and like confess your sins and repent and then move forward and become a better person.
Totally. And so that was kind of her perspective in forgiving him the first time. But unfortunately, nothing she could do or anyone else could do could keep him sober. And around this time, something else started happening to Danny.
Yes.
Something paranormal. He started seeing things. At first, he claimed to see a UFO, as well as some other things far more terrifying.
It's a hot, muggy night in July. Danny tosses and turns in his bed. He and O'Mather had just put their daughter to sleep. And despite how exhausted Danny is, he is wide awake, unable to sleep. From the bed, he looks through the open window onto the dimly lit street. And then, suddenly, he's blasted with a burst of cold, wintry air. At first, Danny wonders if they're being hit by a tornado. But O'Mather doesn't stir from her deep slumber. Whatever is causing this, it's just for him. And that's when he sees it. Crawling in from the outside of the window is a dark, shadowy form, its eyes piercing Danny's soul with a devilish hunger. Something deep inside Danny knows what he is looking at. A demon. This entity slithers into the room, crawling, joints cracking, in an inhuman manner, all the way up into the upper corner. It lurks there, latching itself onto the ceiling. Watching, waiting. Danny knows what it's after. His soul. He's paralyzed by fear, too scared to move, too terrified to speak. So finally, Danny finds the power to cry out a name. Jesus. He says it 3 times. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And the demon disappears. After that, all goes quiet. But Danny feels its presence long after this, constantly following in his shadow. Well, that was terrifying. I even terrified myself.
Yeah. And I'm like, we are the first people to scream paranormal activity. Like, we truly believe in ghosts and demons and all of those things. But it does make me wonder in this moment, too, given all that has happened in his view of the church attempting to save him and God, I do wonder if because he's starting to kind of dissolve into himself again and is not being able or not receptive to the help, if this is like his way and his mind's way of kind of seeing the light and dark battling one another.
Because like in this moment, he's trying to be a better person for his wife and kid that's on the way. But this dark side of him lingers, waiting to like come out.
Right. And he calls for God. He calls for a better life.
Yes.
But does he succeed in getting it?
No.
No, that's why
his
he's
own
an episode
fault.
now here.
Yeah.
So whether Danny really saw a demon or if this was something in his psyche, maybe a case of sleep paralysis, we don't really know. Maybe he just made the whole thing up.
We'll get to it in a minute.
Yeah.
Because this is also information told to us by Danny. Told to us personally by Danny. No.
It wasn't told personally.
That Danny wrote about his experiences, and we'll unpack that in a minute.
Right.
Yeah.
But after this, his behavior only became more erratic. And in 1977, after less than 3 years of marriage, he and O'Mather divorced, and she took their young daughter with her. Danny was so devastated. He lost the family that he so fantasized about having, and this totally led him to basically like spiral, even more than he already was spiraling.
Right.
And along with his emotional pain, he suffered a physical setback as well. One day, while he was at his job at a bakery, he had an accident with a bread slicer, and he lost part of his left ring finger.
Which almost feels ironic. You know, it's like his wife and child just left him.
And then his ring finger.
Almost instantly, he like loses a part of his ring finger. Like the universe reminding him, like, you can't have that one thing you've always wanted.
Which is, in part, it's like my mind has so much trouble with talking about killers like this because so many of them did experience really terrible things growing up. And so part of me wants to sympathize with them. And I guess I do with the young child version of them.
Right.
But what happens after, I'm like, this is
They're
horrific.
responsible for the actions that then they take.
It's complicated.
Yes.
So he blamed the world for all of his problems, and he decided that he was going to get some payback to the world for everything that happened to him, for his missing finger. And he committed a series of armed robberies, but he wasn't exactly good at the armed robberies. And so he got caught pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
In 1979, the 25-year-old was arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison. And the time behind bars only caused his anger to fester. And I'm sure remind him of the time that he was in jail.
For 2 weeks as a young kid.
We have no idea what happened in those 2 weeks.
Right.
So like his father, violence became Danny's solution to everything. So obviously it's no surprise that almost immediately after being released, he was arrested again for another robbery in Mississippi, repeating crimes, probably still deeply drinking. And he served 3 more years for this robbery, getting out in 1988 when he was 34 years old.
And while we're not psychological people, professionals, that's clearly we're not, because I can't even say
we're not psychologists.
We're not psychological professional people. That's a scientific term there. I feel like I've read a lot about killers and their progression to what they ultimately want, which is murder. And a lot of them do start with petty crimes. A lot of them do commit like the peeping Tom or
again the Golden State Killer. It's like the breaking and entering, to maybe stealing a couple things, maybe not, just seeing like what they
can get away with. And it's like building up this confidence. Or I think there's also an element of like, what if I do this one crime? Like, can it satiate the deeper urges that I have?
Right.
And the answer is almost always maybe for a time being, but not always.
Right. And also I feel like at this point too, just knowing that there is this sort of like paranormal element that's being brought into Danny's story, it does remind me of The Son of Sam a bit as well, where it's just like a lot of times killers will blame everyone else, but sometimes they also blame the paranormal in some sort of someone or something who's trying to control their mind, and they're responsible, not them.
Because it's a way to disassociate, because it's like That's a different version. That's not me. That's
right. I was forced to do that.
Yeah.
Like Amityville Horror.
This is a lighthearted iteration of this, but my friend Jill has a daughter who has a imaginary friend named Curly, but anytime that Abby does anything wrong, she goes, it wasn't me, it was Curly.
Curly, not Carly, Curly.
Which is like such like a villainous alter ego. But it's like she put her hand in the toilet water.
Yeah.
She's not committing robberies or murdering anyone.
Exactly. So Danny serving these additional 3 years in jail for this robbery. This time it seemed maybe a little bit different for Danny. It seemed like maybe he finally learned his lesson. And when he got out, he tried to start over and he got a few restaurant jobs, but he could never really hold them down for very long. He got fired again and again, but he took this extremely personally. Like this was such an attack on him and who he was that he was
not
getting
the
fired.
fact that he's still drinking a lot and not
showing
getting
up to
his
shifts or
job done. Yeah,
exactly. Danny got so angry that the mere sight of someone else being happy seemed to completely trigger him. It made him so incredibly furious. And he especially hated to see a pretty woman happy and smiling. He thought back to the night in the woods all those years ago. The bloody fantasies from back then returned once more with a vengeance. And on November 4th, 1989, the 35-year-old decided to turn these fantasies into reality. Warning, the following segment includes depictions of a murder of a child. And so if you'd like to skip past it, you can fast forward about a minute.
Danny walks into Dillard's department store, his mind reeling. He has just been fired from another job, this time at the Western Sizzler restaurant in the same mall. But he is not ready to go home. Not yet. Instead, he finds himself gravitating towards the cosmetics counter at Dillard's. There is a young woman who works there, 24-year-old Julie Grissom. She's pretty, brunette, dazzling smile. Danny's been watching Julie for a while now, and he hates her for absolutely no other reason than the fact that she exists. And tonight, he's decided he's going to make her pay. When Julie's shift ends, Danny follows her into the parking lot. He watches Julie climb into her car, tails her at a safe distance, and when she gets home, Danny watches her go through the front door and continues to spy on her through the bedroom window. Then around 6 o'clock, he pulls out his knife and moves in. He finds the door unlocked. He sees a man, presumably Julie's dad, cooking steaks for dinner. He also sees a boy no older than 10 playing with his toys in front of the TV. Danny slips by both of them unnoticed. He tiptoes upstairs into Julie's bedroom. He then ties her up with tape, sexually assaults her, and kills her. He then goes back downstairs, kills her father, and last of all, takes young Sean's life too. After the murders, he spends hours cleaning the bodies with vinegar to get rid of any trace of evidence. He mutilates them, and then he poses Julie's body in a provocative, shocking manner, leaving her on the bed, legs spread out, and hair fanned out behind her. Because clearly, Danny wanted to terrify the person who found the bodies. He wants to leave a signature, a personal statement, to show he is the one in control. As Danny moves through these vile acts, his resentment towards his mother quiets. The pain from his father's abuse subsides, ever so slightly. But even now, it doesn't fully go away.
Well, it's interesting too that some people say that the way that he posed the body was like for a signature move or basically just like for the shock of the crime. But also just knowing what I know about like his resentment towards his mother and targeting people who reminded him of his mother, it does feel almost like a humiliation thing.
And control. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To be like, I took your life and now I'm going to like make a mockery of you too.
Right.
It's so disturbing.
2 days later, the Grissom family's neighbors found their gruesome murders, the gruesome scene, and they called police. Julie Grissom, her father Tom, and her 8-year-old nephew Sean were deceased. Detectives launched an investigation but weren't able to zero in on a subject. Danny had cleaned the scene so thoroughly that he did not leave behind anything too obvious. They did collect a sample of his semen, though, but DNA testing was not a thing back then, so they couldn't really do anything with it. So there was no clear suspect. It was impossible to tell who the semen belonged to. And since Danny didn't know Julie personally, there was no way to connect him to the murders.
Also, like, looking at this time in the 70s, we talk about the 70s as being like the height of serial killers, but I think it was also the first time that like profilers were becoming more common, and like this belief in psychology to help understand a killer and a criminal was becoming accepted. So the term serial killer wasn't really known until this time. So it's like, as we're evolving through this story, keeping that in mind, like people don't really know what to do with this information.
Right. But we hope that everyone's just keeping all of the evidence stashed away so that,
yes,
you know, like DNA evidence is still finding and identifying both murderers and victims.
Today. Yeah, definitely.
So getting away with this heinous crime gave Danny a sense of superiority that he had been chasing for a while now in his life. But this also made him very paranoid that he was going to be caught. So afterward, he laid low for about 6 months until he realized no one was coming for him. Then in May of 1990, he visited his parents, and it wasn't long before a pretty petty argument broke out between he and his father. It was raining that day, and his father, James, demanded that Danny roll up the windows in the backseat of the car. But they were under a covered carport, so Danny said, "Why? There's no point." And James didn't care. It was his house, his rules. And when Danny refused, James pulled a gun on his son, stood in the rain, and fired several shots at the direction of Danny.
It's...
Can you imagine? Because you won't roll up a car window. So you're going to get shot at by your father.
I mean, this is a perfect example of like how small, like literally anything Danny did growing up,
anything
he would get abused for. But this is now an escalation to where his own father is pulling out a gun and shooting at him.
Right.
Not threatening him with it, fully shooting at him.
Fully shooting at him. So Danny ran away while his father cursed him, revolver in his hand. And James thought that his son had basically left for good after this argument. Well, is it an argument? I don't know. It's a full-on like attack.
Full-on shootout.
Assault.
Yeah.
But Danny didn't leave. He actually didn't go very far at all. In fact, he went home to their backyard where he knew his dad kept a backup pistol stashed in the shed. So then he grabs the pistol, and he goes to the back door of their house and he kicks it in. His mom is there and she's terrified. So she screams. She flees to the bathroom to hide. She locked herself inside while James and Danny had a shootout. They're shooting at one another.
Right. James still has the gun that he just shot at his son at, and Danny is shooting back.
And now he has a weapon too. James was hit several times and he fell to the floor. Danny looked down at his father, kicked his limp body, and then ran out of the house. But James didn't die, which, like, kind of unfortunate. I kind of wish he did.
He was shot in the head
so
too,
horrible.
which is crazy. The fact that he survived that.
He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. He'd been shot in the stomach and in the head, and miraculously, somehow he survived this. The cops then go after Danny, but Danny is nowhere to be found. He hightailed it out of town, left for a few months, and then he bounced.
And I did read that. So like he fled and he like just kept driving basically with no destination in mind. But when he did temporarily stop, he called the hospital where his dad had been admitted to check up on him to make sure he was okay. Which again goes back to this really complicated relationship he had with his dad.
He wants him dead, but not really.
Yeah.
But also yes. But also no.
Right.
It's all very confusing. But yeah, so he bounced around from county to county, one step ahead of police. He drove and drove and drove. And at a certain point, he did end up staying with a relative in Southern California. But by the time authorities learned of that and they arrived, he was already gone. He was driving east again. And basically his plan was to make it to the Florida Keys to then get in a boat and escape to Jamaica. But he didn't make it that far. He did steal cars and rob convenience stores to basically live on his way. But in late July 1990, his money ran out in the city of Gainesville, Florida. So just 500 miles north of Key West. He was restless. He was fried from weeks on the road, hiding and running. The life he knew was over, and his rage only returned. And according to Danny, this is what happened next.
It is the night of August 23rd, 1990. Danny is tired from weeks spent on the run. He's out of money, out of places to hide. So he sets up camp in a patch of woods. He's got a tent, a camp bed, and really not much else. It reminds him of running away from home when he was a teenager. Back then, he was scared of the dark. But now, the dark is the only place he feels safe. A place where no one can find him and no one can hurt him. Using a tape recorder, he leaves a farewell to his friends and family and apologizes to his parents, claiming he only ever wanted to make his father proud. His final words on the tape are, quote, "I got something I gotta do. Love ya. Bye." After that, he leaves the woods, headed to his dark purpose. Danny stalks the darkened streets, peering into apartments around the University of Florida's campus. Each time he sees a woman undressing, he takes off his jeans right then and there, and he's caught twice by 2 different night watchmen, but manages to pull up his pants and run away both times. Then at around 3 a.m. on August 24th, he arrives at the complex where Christina Powell and Sonia Larson live. He had spied on them before. He knows that there is no one else there in that apartment, and when he realizes that their back door is unlocked, he decides to go in. When Danny steps inside, he finds Christina asleep on the couch. He stands over her for several minutes, debating what to do. Not if he should hurt her, but which roommate he wants to go after first. He decides to leave Christina for the moment, so Danny heads upstairs to find Sonia. She's in her bedroom, asleep. Danny pulls out a K-bar military knife, and before Sonia can wake up, he stabs her. To make sure she doesn't cry out, Danny places tape over her mouth. Then he heads back downstairs where Christina is still sleeping. He grabs her, ties her hands behind her back, and then rapes and tortures Christina before killing her. He then robs the place and spends the rest of the morning cleaning up like he did before. Soap and vinegar to get rid of the tape residue and any other forensic evidence. When he's done, Danny mutilates the bodies and poses them for the police like he did with the Grissoms.
Later, Danny will claim that there is this demonic being called Gemini who was in control of all of these killings. And according to Danny, Gemini had been in his mind since he was in that filthy Mississippi prison sometime in the mid-'80s.
And here's where we get to this conversation of, was that demon real? Because This is the tricky thing. And since this whole season of Crimes Of is about movies and who inspired them, Danny had gone to see The Exorcist 3 very recently, prior to killing Sonia and Christina. Guess what the name of the demon-possessed killer in that movie is? Gemini.
So, demon or no demon, Danny is out for blood, and on August 25th, 1990, the day after murdering Christina and Sonia, Danny struck again. The morning after killing Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, Danny Rolling walked into an IHOP, sat down, and ordered breakfast as if it were any other day. As he ate, he couldn't keep his eyes off of one of the other customers, 18-year-old Christa Hoyt. She was just his type. She was beautiful, she was brunette, and she was grinning from ear to ear. Happy, happy Christa. And he hated her. He hated seeing anyone happy, especially someone like Christa. So Danny followed Christa home and lurked outside, watching her all day until she went out for the night. And while she was gone, he broke into her apartment and he hid and waited there until she returned. He crouched behind her bedroom door for hours, listening carefully for the sound of the door. And around 11 p.m., Christa came home after a night out with friends, and Danny attacked her. He pounced on her before she even realized what was happening, before she could understand that there was someone in her room with her.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
But she fought back. Yet Danny was twice her size. He overpowered her, he stabbed her, and he decapitated her with his military-issue knife. And when he was done, he placed her severed head on a bookshelf. It was deliberately positioned opposite of a mirror, so the first thing anyone would see when they walk in was her head. And this was just another act of control from Danny, almost making her decapitated head look at her headless body.
Like, look at the control I have over you.
Right.
Yeah.
And it took Danny until 4 a.m. to get the pose just right before he finished up cleaning. It's around the same time that the parents of his first victim, Christina Powell, were starting to get worried about their daughter. And they were supposed to help her move into a new place, but she wasn't answering her phone. And so they decide, hey, we'll just go show up anyway and see what's happening. But the front door is locked. No one's answering. They can't get a hold of their daughter. And so they decide to call the police. Upon arrival, a police officer forced open the door, walking into a super gruesome and tragic scene. Inside, he found the decaying bodies of Christina and Sonia,
which were left on display for police to find. Yeah.
And the news of their death sent shockwaves through the city of Gainesville. College students throughout Gainesville locked their doors, changed their routines. They stopped going out by themselves. 23-year-old Tracy Paulus was one of those students. She lived only a mile or so from Christina and Sonia, and she was so terrified of what happened to those girls. And what she didn't know was at that time, the body of Danny's third victim, Christa Hoyt, was also being discovered. After midnight on August 27th, she called her friend and then her sister to share some of her fears of this unnamed, unidentified killer in the area. And the two of them did their best to reassure her and to calm her down. All the while, Danny Rolling is watching Tracy from outside of her window.
It's so sad because I imagine every person in this town is panicking, scared, right, calling their loved ones, being like, I don't want to go to sleep tonight. And unfortunately, Tracy Paula's is being watched by him.
And this is a scene from Scream, right? Like, you make the phone call to your friend, help, come over, I need you, boyfriend. And the killer's outside watching you through the window.
So sad.
She stayed up until 2:45 a.m. or so until her roommate, Manny Tabota, got home from work. Manny was a super big former football player, definitely made her feel a lot safer having him as the roommate. And he was clearly very strong, very tough. Danny Rolling, seeing this guy, knew that he wouldn't stand a chance against Manny, at least not in a fair fight. So around 3 a.m., Danny cracked open the sliding glass door to this apartment using a screwdriver. Tracy's room was along a hallway. Manny's room was right across from it. So Danny went to Manny's room first. Manny was already fast asleep, and Danny took out his K-bar knife, the same one he'd used in the previous murders, and he plunged it into this young man's chest. The blow woke Manny up immediately, and he managed to actually fight back this attacker.
Right.
And even with a knife in his heart, he almost knocked Danny out. But it was too much for Manny to overcome. Danny had stabbed him 31 more times before Manny actually succumbed to his wounds. But the commotion of all of this did wake Tracy up, and she came out to see what was going on. She walked into Manny's bedroom just as Danny staggered to his feet. She then sprinted to her own room, but Danny got to her before she could lock the door. By the end of the night, the Gainesville Ripper had claimed his 4th and 5th victims in just 4 days. Danny knew he couldn't stay in the area. He was out of money. But before he made a run for it, he needed to rob a bank. The money had a dye pack in it, so when Danny brought it back to the campsite, it blew up and sprayed pink all over him and all over everything. And so while Danny decided what to do next, the police were looking for him and they found his campsite. Danny somehow manages to escape this, and he left everything behind, including his gun, the screwdriver that he'd used to break into his victim's apartments, the pink money.
Yeah.
And at this point, though, the officers didn't really make the connection that the bank robber was also the murderer. They just thought that they basically found the bank robber's campsite.
Well, because it also just seems like such a different crime.
Right.
Like it is such a different, drastically different crime than
And
these
it's a weird thing to
murders.
go back to back, like a
right.
double murder to bank robbery.
Right. So they think they have two different criminals.
Yes. And in the coming days, 2 men would be arrested for Danny's crimes. For the bank robbery, they thought that it was a man named Michael J. Martin who'd also been camping in the woods that night. And when it came to the murders, their main suspect was 19-year-old Edward Humphrey, a troubled University of Florida freshman who lived in the same complex as Tracy, Paula, and Manny Tabota. But now, at this point in time, DNA evidence is in play, and thanks to the DNA evidence, the police quickly realized that they had the wrong guys. So these two people who they thought were responsible for Danny Rolling's crimes are freed and cleared.
Yeah.
As the investigators on the bank robbery regrouped, they traced the gun back to a guy in the town of Sarasota, and when they talked to this guy, the guy admitted that he had sold his gun to someone else. And as he remembered this person, he remembered there was something very distinctive about the guy who bought his gun. This guy was missing a part of his left ring finger. So when one of the investigators on the case shared this information in a meeting, a colleague with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement stood up from his seat because he was also investigating the Gainesville murders, and the killer had left something behind at Sonia, Larson, and Christina Powell's apartment. A paper towel that he had used to wipe off his penis, and the handprint on it
showed that he was missing the top of his left ring finger.
So the authorities now know that the bank robber and the Gainesville killer are the same person. But the only problem is they don't know who that is.
Right.
So they are getting closer. And a couple months later, they do get their answer from a very unexpected source.
Cindy Jurassic turns up the volume on her car radio as she passes through the Florida Panhandle. It's late August, and the Gainesville Ripper murders are all over the airwaves. As Cindy listens to the grisly details, she thinks it sounds a lot like the Grissom family murders in her hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana. So she can't help but wonder, is the Gainesville Ripper responsible for those murders too? And if that's true, Cindy thinks she knows who that is. Because back in Shreveport, Cindy and her husband had been friends with a guy named Danny Rolling. She'd met him through church, but there was always something weird about Danny. He just rubbed her the wrong way. But her husband liked him well enough, so Danny came over once in a while. Cindy thinks about the last time she saw Danny Rolling. Earlier that year, sometime around the beginning of 1990, Danny had been hanging out at their house when he made some very disturbing comments to her husband. Danny told Cindy's husband that he liked cutting people with knives. Thinking back on it now, Cindy realizes it had just been a few months after the Grissoms were violently stabbed to death. After that, Cindy never saw Danny again, and all he said was that he was leaving for someplace sunny, a place where there were a lot of young, pretty girls. Gainesville definitely fit that description. At the time, Cindy convinced herself there is no way that someone she knew killed the Grissoms. It couldn't have been Danny. But now she really can't deny it anymore. A serial killer had been in her house and he had just struck again. So now Cindy knows she has to do something about it.
It did take Cindy a few months before she called police with her suspicions, but when she did contact them in November of 1990, they immediately believed her and took action. It turns out they had just connected the Grissom murders to the Gainesville Ripper themselves. And the disturbing poses, the brutal stabbings, the same kind of knife, the military issue K-bar, it all pointed to the same person. Danny was actually already in custody at this point, but not for those crimes. He had been arrested about a week after the Gainesville murders for robbing a supermarket. The police still had not connected him to the bank robbery or any of the murders, but after Cindy's tip, they turned all of their attention to Danny. They compared his DNA samples to the ones taken from the Gainesville crime scenes, and it turned out he was not as careful as he thought he was because, of course, DNA match.
And also, what was Danny missing? The tip of his left ring finger.
Right. Like, how many...
It's all falling into place.
How many fingerless guys are going around jerking themselves off and
murdering people?
Crime scenes.
Yeah.
Seems implausible that it would be anyone other than Danny. So a year later, in November of 1991, Danny is charged with 5 counts of murder for the Gainesville Ripper crimes. And he was not interested in fighting these charges at all. He basically just took it. He was like, yeah. And in his own little twisted way, he demonstrated some remorse for what he did-ish because he spent a lot of time with a state-appointed spiritual advisor.
Is that remorse, or is that, again, playing into all of the psychological...
Psychosis or like things like that. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. But it reminded him of his time at the Shreveport church, apparently, which was more of like the happiest period of his life. And so even though his lawyers thought that he did have a decent case, he surprised them by insisting that he actually do plead guilty without a deal. 3 years later, Danny Rolling was sentenced to death. And while Danny was never officially charged with the Grissom murders, he did freely confess to them. The confession came just before his execution on October 25th, 2006.
This case of Danny Rolling is a really good example of, I think, why people are interested in true crime and spend a lot of time reading it and thinking about it. And one of the stories that we didn't really mention in the episode is prior to his first murder of the Grissom murders, there was a woman that Danny attacked, and he broke into her home, followed a lot of the same things that he had done with all of his other victims. He was wearing like a mask, and he broke into this woman's home and attacked her, tied her up, sexually assaulted her. And this woman the whole time was like, how do I survive this? And she knew. And
she had been a big consumer of
true
these
crime.
Types of stories. She was a true crime
fanatic.
And
so she knew not to anger him because angering him would only make it worse. So she almost befriended him. She
insisted that he keep his face covered with a mask.
Yep. She offered him a drink.
Which he didn't take. It was her attempt at getting a fingerprint.
Yeah. And then she also, again, she knew she might get murdered, and she decided that she was going to help leave evidence behind so that he would get caught. After he had assaulted her, he allowed her to go shower in her bathroom by herself. And before showering, she wiped her body and got fluids and stuff on a towel that she hid for investigators to find with hopefully his DNA. And then, yes, after it was done, he asked if he should take off his mask. And she said, no, because I don't want to identify you.
Yeah,
or I don't want to
know who you are.
And then he let her go.
Yeah. When morning started to come, she said, I think it's about time that you head out. And he said, okay, give me 10 minutes before you call the authorities.
You know what he said to her? He said, in another life, I could see myself dating you. That is just like the epitome of the sickness and the, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like total disconnect of reality that he had.
And this is not to say that if any of the other victims that he murdered had done the same thing, that they would have survived.
Right.
This is a psychotic killer.
Right.
So,
and he was progressing and escalating. So, yeah. Like we said, Danny Rolling's crimes are truly stomach-churning, and he did admit to the police that he posed the victims for maximum shock value because he had heard about Ted Bundy on the news, and he wanted fame the same way Ted Bundy was getting.
Which is interesting that he also chose Florida college girls.
He was inspired. Sadly, he did get the attention he wanted, and back in 1994, after Danny was convicted, ABC News did a special on him. And everyone was tuning in, including a young screenwriter named Kevin Williamson. And he said that the Gainesville Ripper's murders inspired him to write the script that would become what we know as Scream. Originally titled Scary Movie, which is, I think, funny because then the scary movies were made fun of movies like Scream. But it is interesting because even the example of the one woman who was able to walk away from that initial attack, I can almost see some of that influence in the Scream movies where there's times where they're dragging themselves, the girls are dragging themselves across the ground, and yet they somehow get away because it's the game, the killer's letting them. Yeah. And Danny took pleasure in this torture of his victims. But Danny Rolling was the foundation for the original Ghostface character. If you're watching on YouTube, we have some little Easter eggs on our set, including the Scream mask, which isn't so little. I think it's obvious you can see it.
Where is it?
Hidden in plain sight. But considering Danny Rolling's tendencies towards the theatrics and the posing of his victims, it is no surprise that his murders became inspiration for a slasher film.
Mm-hmm.
And reportedly, the first draft of the script was so grotesque that they had to tone it back. And so then the final draft ended up being a more satirical homage to horror films. But there are clearly echoes of Danny's crimes still in the film.
Yes.
And I think the most notable one, which I made note of or reference to earlier, is the opening scene where Drew Barrymore plays a teenager. She's Casey Becker, home alone when the phone rings. And she has no idea that the caller on the other end is Ghostface. And the next few minutes are terrifying as Ghostface is lurking outside, taunting her, ratcheting up the tension. And then he strikes, leaving Casey's mangled body in horrific display. You can see the similarities right away.
Mm-hmm.
But there are obviously a few key differences. Ghostface goes after high schoolers, not college students. And spoiler alert, I don't know how this would be a spoiler. If you haven't seen Scream,
they've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's on you for not tuning into the franchise.
And it will still be an enjoyable watch, even if you know that this is a spoiler. Unlike Danny Rolling's crimes in Scream, the killer is actually two killers. It's two young men who are classmates to the victims.
Which still kind of feels inspired by Danny, because if there's this kind of fight between good and bad and like kind of seeing himself as split between two people in a way.
Right. Yeah. So there's still a lot of similarities.
I think part of Danny wanted another version of him to be good.
He didn't want that.
Whereas these are just two killers.
Yes. And like many of Danny's real life victims, Drew Barrymore and a lot of the other victims and potential victims that the masked killer, Ghostface killer, wants to attack in the movie are young, pretty girls. And the way that he's lurking outside really does remind me of Tracy Paulus, who's calling her sister, calling her friends, and all the while, Danny Rolling is standing outside watching her through the window.
Right.
Oh, and then I think like the last biggest on-the-nose connection between the two is the frenzied way that the killers kill their victims, both in Scream and then Danny Rolling in real life. The frenzied stabbings.
Stabs.
Yeah.
Slasher films.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, movies are a lot less important than the families Danny Rolling destroyed and the people who suffered at his hands. On-screen monsters are fun because they're pretend, they're not real, right? But the real story is a terrible tragedy. And growing up, Danny learned to express himself through violence instead of love. He carried those hateful, bitter feelings into adulthood. And when he failed to escape the cycle of abuse, he took out his resentment on the innocent. He stole the futures of young people, their friends and family, because he could never see one for himself. And even though his crimes were turned into a larger-than-life satire, there is nothing funny about Danny Rolling's crimes. We can only hope that his victims' loved ones have found some peace, knowing that he was brought to justice. And that even if Scream has a bunch of sequels, Danny Rolling can never hurt anyone again.
And before we say goodbye and see you next week, I did promise some tea.
Oh, yes.
Some tea. Okay, it's nothing like dramatic, but so my friend Eileen, who I worked with on Prodigal Son, her husband Tyler, directed the more recent Screams. And they filmed them in, I think it was North Carolina or South Carolina, one of those beach towns. And they were all on set. And, you know, the new cast is like the young new cast. And
Jenna Ortega.
And some of the old cast reprised their roles. And I guess with the original films, when they were filming, like Courtney Cox and everyone, when they were filming the original Scream, they would like go out and party and like be kind of rowdy and crazy. I
almost feel like you have to, though, to like detach yourself from what you're depicting on screen.
And they on set were like shocked at how Jenna Ortega and the new young cast would spend their time off set, because they would play like board games and like so pure and innocent, and they like rented like a camper van and spent a weekend on the beach.
Oh
like,
my God.
So pure in comparison to how set was on the early days of the original Scream.
Dang. either way, I do feel like you have to find something outside of filming that does feel kind of like wholesome or just like takes your mind completely off of what you just had to portray.
Yes.
We are your hosts, Sabrina Deana-Roga and Corinne Vien. Join us next Tuesday for another peek inside another Crimes of Infamy. And if there are any cases that you would like us to cover, please let us know in the comments. Here at Crime House, we want to thank each and every one of you for your support. If you like what you heard today, please reach out on all social media at Crime House. Don't forget to rate, review, and follow Crimes of wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback truly makes a difference. See you next week. Bye!